The month of Av needs comfort because, tragically, in the month of Av, we have many tragedies, including the destruction of the first and the second Beis Hamikdash, the temple in Yerushalayim. For those of you here Sunday, I passed out this flyer of the laws of Tisha B'Av. If you weren't here and you didn't get one, please ask me. I'd be glad to give it to you. The 9 days begins as of tonight, in addition. So that means that the restrictions of the 9 days are in effect. And that means that the prohibition of meat and wine, which of course is suspended on Shabbos, the prohibition of laundering and wearing freshly laundered clothing, and the prohibition of pleasure bathing. What is interesting, and I might mention it's not a part of the parasha, is that there are 2 times in the Torah when the Torah will digress into a large segment of curses and admonitions and warnings and scoldings and predictions of horrible things. And one is at the end of the book of at the end of the 3rd book of the Torah. It's called B'chukotai. That's the end of the book Vayikra. The other one is in the next book, in the 5th book in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, and it's found in the Parasha Ki Tavo. If you'll take a quick look at B'chukotai, which is on page, you'll see the beginning of what is known as the Tochacha on 7:12, 7:13. What's your name again? Yeah, the Tochacha actually begins, I beg your pardon, at 7:11, verse 14. On 7:11, verse 14, the Tochacha begins, he calls it the admonition. And the punishments got progressively worse because each time the Torah says, you didn't listen to Hashem, and this happened. You didn't take heed, and you didn't realize what was happening or why it was happening, and therefore another series of punishments comes. And they go over and again and again and again because you're not getting the message. The whole idea of punishment is consequence. The whole idea of consequence is you're getting the message. Are you aware of what's happening and why it's happening? And so this admonition is the first, what we call the Tochacha. One of the rules of the Tochacha, which really is not germane to tonight anyway, but just for your own information, is that it is the only time when a person is called up to the Torah for this particular reading that he's not called by name. No one wants to be associated with him. In fact, oftentimes we don't call anybody up. What we do is we let the one who's reading the Torah, the Baal Koreh, he goes up because he's there anyway, and he's the one that will read that and be honored with that aliyah, with that going up to the Torah, which I don't know how much of an honor it is, but people are shying away from it. They're shying away. They're frightened. I mean, you read this stuff, it's scary. I don't want to be called up for this. Sometimes they call the Rav up. The Rav must therefore, the rabbi has to shoulder the sorrows of the community. Sometimes, and in years past I used to see it as a boy, that they would call up a Holocaust survivor for these passages, because he went through what was written, and he would say, "This is my aliyah. I get called up for this," which made you, of course, gave you a lot of newfound and greater respect for what seemed to be a simple man who did not live a simple life. In any event, there were twice that this happens. They're called the curses the warnings, the predictions of tragedy. We call it in Hebrew the tochacha, and in English it's called the admonition. I point out the first one, and you'll see that read with me on the margin of 7:11. But it says the tochacha admonition. It'll say the first series of punishments, then the second series, and take a look at the second series where it says number 18. If despite this you do not heed me, then I shall purge you further. Now skip to 7:13 and verse 21. The third series of punishments. If you behave casually with me and refuse to heed me, then I shall lay a further blow upon you. The fourth series on page 23, verse 23 coming up. Also at 7:13, but you got to stay with me to follow this. If despite these you will not be chastised towards me. Fifth series is 27. You still don't heed me, and then it says the last. Actually, the last one is the fifth series, and it says some pretty horrible things. You can read them yourselves. I don't even want to read them aloud. But you will look at it. It says at the bottom of the page 7:13, I will lay your cities in ruin, and I will make your sanctuaries desolate. 34, the next paragraph. Then the land will be appeased for its sabbaticals during all the years of its desolation, while you are in the land of your foes. What this simply means is that during the time that the Jewish people were in Israel, one of the sins they were committing continuously was the violation of sabbaticals. The violation of sabbaticals was the fact that they did not let the land stop planting and stop reaping on the seventh year. Sabbatical year, the land must lie empty and not be, the soil should not be tilled, and there should be no working of the land and total trust in Hashem. Now you think about that for a second, and you realize that when we ask a person to keep Shabbos, not to go to work on Friday night, Saturday, sometimes the person might say, this is a big challenge for me because, my biggest day is Saturday. And it takes a lot of courage to become a Sabbath observer, a Shomer Shabbos. But imagine if, let's say, God said to you, I don't want you to take off one day a week for me. I want you to take off 1 year out of every 7. The whole year you don't go to work. Because some might say, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to be bored to death. And I'm facing that too myself. I'm supposed to retire soon, So what am I going to do? Take up golfing maybe. Bowling maybe. Surfing maybe. But I know what to do. I'm going to sit and learn Torah. You want to come in? So maybe that's what I'll do. I'll learn Torah. How about that for a good idea? And frankly, that's what the farmers used to do in ancient Israel. But you still needed courage of faith, in order to be able to do this year, because you had to trust that the land would still produce, and without planting would still produce the next year as well. And that took a lot of faith. And there are farmers today that require that faith and still use it in their attempt to fulfill the mitzvah. But there were Jews who didn't. Many farmers did not during the time of the first destruction. And they abused the land. And the land is a holy land, the land of Israel. That's why it has these rules that no other land has about how much you have to tithe the produce, and of course the fact that you can't at all have any produce at all during the 7th year. And whatever you wanted to take, just to take, but you couldn't sell it or claim ownership over it. Anybody, your whole field that was yours for 6 years became everybody's during the 7th year. And so, that looks like a good idea. Whose idea was this? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihiyah bidvaro. Wonderful. And so, the land was abused, and therefore the land was was abandoned. People were kicked out of the land, and there had been 70 violations of sabbatical years. Each sabbatical year was 7. 70 times 7 was 490 years that Hashem waited for the people to do tshuva, to repent, and they didn't. So therefore, out from the land they go. So let's understand, many, many atrocities are happening at the first exile and the second exile. During these horrible sufferings, and there is horrible oppression and persecution, it gets worse and worse, as we just learned a moment ago, if we don't do tshuva, if we don't repent. I'm giving you this punishment. You didn't repent, I'll give you a worse one. You didn't repent, a worse one. I didn't repent, a worse one. What's the worst of all? The last one. What's the last one? Right here, it's 7:15, verse 34. Then the land will be appeased for its sabbaticals and all the years of its desolation, while you are the land of your foes. There is nothing worse in the world than exile, than being away from your homeland. That's the last. And remember, there are a lot of other horrible things that took place. We didn't even talk about them, really. But going out of Israel, losing Israel, not being able to live in Israel, is the ultimate, the acme of suffering. It's worse than death. Death is death. But to live a life of death by living abroad and being isolated and being not with your brothers and sisters and people, sent to different countries, some went to the Middle Eastern countries and the Sephardic countries in Spain, others went to the European countries, but we're all dispersed in Russia and Germany, and we're all dispersed. Where's our brother? We don't have it because why? Because we're all over the place rather than being at home. Well, this is the worst there is, and I say it not only from a logical perspective, I say it also from the fact that it says so in the Torah. Torah puts it as the last of all the sufferings. If you don't do tshuva, at the very end, the worst thing is going to happen of all, you'll be thrown out of your land. Now this happened here. This here is a prediction. This is a prophecy, right? This is what we call the prophecy of doom in the event of misbehavior. Okay, I say to you, and you trust me, that it happens again, and it's recited again in the last book of the Torah, the 5th book, in the Parsha Ki Tavo. Again, the same, pretty much a repetition of it, little different variations, and the destructions and the predictions of doom. And again, the last thing will be the exile. Here's the phenomenon. The phenomenon is that it's predicted. The phenomenon is that it came true. I mean, God's predicting it. God's telling you in the Torah this is what's going to happen. And it happened. More than that. It happened exactly the same way that the Torah says it will happen. Incredible sense of history coming true. And then it happens. The exile. The fact that the Torah says it twice indicates that it's going to happen twice. And it did. The first destruction. The second destruction. By a Tisha and by a Sheni. And again, the phenomena of this prediction, it comes true, and not once but twice. And of course the exile, not once but twice. But here's the phenomenon about the exile. Nowhere in history do you find a conquering nation coming into another nation and conquering them and exiling them. It just isn't done. When you come into a country and you want to control it, you use its manpower. You don't throw them out. You keep them, make them slaves, make them do whatever you want them to do. But you don't throw them out. It's counterproductive to your interests. Only twice in history did nations come in and throw out the population. And both times, it was the Jews.